Hello, I'm Chris Riggert, and I'm the Stream Team Program Coordinator for the Missouri Department of Conservation. We're going to build off what Matt discussed earlier in the What is a Watershed presentation and start talking about the various parts of the watershed. So let's get into it. Each of these watersheds, regardless of where they are, all have 5 main parts. And we're going to look at each one of these and discuss what they are, where they are, and what functions they might have in an unaltered setting. These watershed components occur throughout the watershed, though at different scales. We'll discuss each of these in greater detail and their functions, but it's important to remember that streams are merely a reflection of their watershed. So if your watershed is in a healthy and intact condition, your stream will be also. So let's take a hike. We're going to start at the top of the hill and discuss areas where we don't normally think about streams. Remember, a first order stream is one with no other tributaries. One of these small streams coming out of the uplands often has no clearly defined channel and is usually dry except for during and shortly after rain events. These are areas that are often overlooked but are vital to the stream network. This is the very beginning of a complex and interconnected stream system. These may seem insignificant at first glance and appear detached from the downstream system, but changes here are magnified in the downstream areas. So the water entering a stream gets its first filtration, organic input, and sediment from the uplands. These uplands are really where the stage is set for the rest of the watershed. Think of these upland areas as providing the foundational building blocks for stream systems. They provide slope for energy, water for overland flow and infiltration, sediment and nutrient inputs, as well as the vegetative filtration. It's also important to remember that while initiating surface runoff, they also help to recharge groundwater in these upland areas. Many of our small first and second order streams can be found in the uplands. But why are these small streams so important? What do they do and why do we care? Well, we care because they make up a vast majority of the stream network and are found throughout the watershed. They have a tremendous effect on the downstream river systems. Healthy headwater streams also provide a lot of ecosystem functions. They process, retain, and transform excess nutrients and organic matter to stream networks. They retain and transport sediment that controls stream channel morphology. They provide debris for the structure of in-stream habitat. They're the beginning of the food web in stream and some terrestrial ecosystems. They provide a refuge from predators and competitors, as well as spawning sites and nursery areas for fish, amphibians, invertebrates, and reptiles. They're a source for colonist species. They supply and maintain water quality and quantity to downstream networks. They store water and recharge groundwater, reducing flood intensities downstream and moderating flows during drought. They also provide a diverse, unique physical and chemical habitats for species specialists. So now that we've discussed the uplands, let's move down the hill into the floodplains. The floodplain can be described as the flattened portion of the stream valley susceptible to large floods, as shown here. If we zoom out a bit, we can see how floodplains are formed by the meandering of a stream or river between the valley walls. Over time, the stream movement back and forth across the valley slowly erodes the channel deeper, and out of bank flows deposit materials. And as downward erosion continues, old floodplain elevations are left stranded higher and younger floodplains develop at a lower elevation. It's important to remember in a healthy system, a stream is connected with its floodplain. An illustration of this can be shown at Black Island Conservation Area in Pemiscot County. It sits immediately north of a bend in the Mississippi River. And here's a shot of the Sharps Lake area in November of 2013. Here's that same area in early December of 2018, inundated as the Mississippi River rose, allowing those floodwaters to spread out, decreasing velocities and its erosive energy. Floodplains have 5 primary ecological functions. They allow floodwaters to spread out and slow down across the area, reducing and slowing velocities and dissipating energy. They also store this floodwater and recharge the groundwater during both precipitation events as well as floods. And finally, it contributes organic matter and promotes nutrient recycling. So as you can imagine, these functions are most effective if the floodplain is well vegetated. This vegetation increases the hydraulic roughness, which slows floodwaters and decreases the erosive energy. And because this energy has been decreased, deposition of materials occur. The stream being connected with the floodplain also increases infiltration and recharges the groundwater. If we come back to this image, we can look at how groundwater interacts with the floodplain and the channel. The level of the water table helps determine the water levels of the stream channel, but as you can see, the water table varies in depth across the landscape, and it's not flat. So let's start by looking a little more closely at the floodplain. Most of the time, we have water moving from the water table into the stream. So groundwater is providing what is called base flow to the stream, which is why the stream is flowing even though it hasn't rained in a while. But during runoff events, water levels in the stream begin to rise above the water table, and some of the stream water will move through the bed and banks to recharge the groundwater. As water levels rise even further and begin to inundate the floodplain, water can then infiltrate and begin recharging the groundwater across the entire floodplain. Finally, as water levels in the stream begin to drop, flow from the groundwater to the stream resumes. But the water table is higher due to this recharge, as well as recharge due to infiltration from the uplands. So the flow in the stream after a runoff event will be higher than it was before, and then will slowly decrease as the water table drops until the next rainfall event. As we move closer to the stream itself, we now come to the riparian corridor. The riparian corridor is the linear strip of land running adjacent to a stream and is part of the floodplain. When a well-vegetated floodplain isn't available, the riparian corridor becomes increasingly important. These areas can help to protect the stream stability and maintain dynamic equilibrium by stabilizing the stream banks and holding the soil in place. This is particularly important on those small headwater stream channels that we talked about earlier. Wooded riparian corridors are supported by groundwater and offer several ecosystem functions, including keeping sediments and debris from being deposited on the floodplain, as well as slowing water and increasing infiltration. This streamside woody vegetation also provides allochthonous materials, the natural organic matter added to stream systems. This leaf litter and woody debris provides the building blocks for the food chain and habitat in a stream ecosystem, as well as providing the caloric energy to drive that system for an entire year in those smaller headwater streams. These organic inputs from trees provide the food and habitat for both insects and fish. These corridors are also important habitat for wildlife as well. Because of the variety of habitats offered, a great number of terrestrial wildlife species use riparian corridors at one time or another. This is especially important as habitats become fragmented. We're finally to where the river runs, the stream channels. Let's take a couple minutes to consider how and why streams move around. The stream has its greatest ability to erode and change the stream channel during high water events. Now, the culprit responsible for these changes at high flows are known as transverse currents. These are what are responsible for the deposition on inside bends and erosion on outside bends. These transverse currents move in a helical downstream motion, spinning opposite to one another. And where they meet in the center is what's known as the thalweg, indicated here by the dashed line, and is usually the deepest portion of the channel. Oftentimes, we assume that stream bank erosion is happening from the top of the bank down because that's what we can see. Usually, transverse currents are eroding the toe of the bank, where the stream bank meets the stream bed. The toe is the foundation of the stream bank and is the most important part of the bank in terms of preventing erosion. So what happens if the foundation of a house is jeopardized? Well, the same thing happens when the toe of the stream is undermined, and is why it's important to address stream erosion at the toe. So here's an excellent example of the thalweg at high flows. This video was taken when the ice was just breaking up in the spring. And notice how the thalweg keeps the ice and debris moving down the center of the channel. So over time, transverse currents that are eroding and depositing on that small scale are responsible for channel migration in the bigger picture. This is the movement of that stream channel throughout the floodplain. And this is what helps maintain and form these floodplains. So channel migration is a natural process, but it can be accelerated due to watershed changes and channel changes. So there's two types of channel migration: lateral, so the side-to-side movement of the channel across the floodplain, and longitudinal, the movement of those meanders in a downstream direction. Here's another still shot of this channel migration model. Notice that what used to be the channel is now left as a side arm or an oxbow. Or maybe it's an off-channel habitat that's very important to aquatic species and the channel itself. There are different names for all these connections, and they all happen naturally over time. When one is lost, another one is formed as the stream moves back and forth across the floodplain. So in this example, A is the main channel, B is a former channel that's now a closed sidearm and is only connected on the downstream side. C is a former channel that's now a dead arm and is only connected during high flow events. And D is an oxbow, or a cutoff that is only connected during extremely high water. The important thing to remember here is that the differences between all of these different kinds of sidearms and oxbows are strictly a function of elevation, and that comes from differences in age of those sidearms, side channels, or cutoffs. And over time, these areas will fill in and become floodplain again, but new ones will continue to form. Keep in mind also that water levels in these areas are determined by the level of the water table. So if we look at this in cross section, we may have a high flow pulse that reaches this elevation. But at other rainfall events, we may get a high flow pulse of something like this, which then allows those connections to occur on these cutoffs, oxbows, or whatnot. The big point is that these connections to the main channel occur at different water stages, and most of the time they're not noticeable until we get a wet season. So as you can see here, the water table is fairly high and connects the stream with these oxbows. All of these connections, like high flow channels, are important in reducing flood velocities and add many different seasonal aquatic habitat components. Remember, variety is the spice of life. Now, we talked a little bit about this when discussing connectivity between groundwater and the floodplain, but let's focus a little bit of attention on the interaction of groundwater and the stream channel. The interaction between the groundwater and the stream channel helps to determine several different stream types. Most streams in Missouri would be considered gaining streams, meaning that the water is moving from the water table as groundwater into the stream channel. However, you may have also heard of losing streams or losing sections of streams, and these are areas where the water is actually moving out of the stream channel and into the groundwater system. And finally, you may have also heard terms like ephemeral, intermittent, and perennial streams. These too are related to the channel's interaction with the groundwater. We can look at this in this longitudinal drawing, where the white line represents the bottom of the stream channel and the blue area is the height of the water table. Now the water table moves up and down over the course of the year in response to recharge. Now you'll see that some areas of the stream, the water table never drops below the stream bed. These are your perennial streams. Some areas, the water table never reaches the stream bed, and these would be ephemeral streams. And then in between these extremes are where the water table is sometimes above the stream bed and sometimes below, and these are your intermittent streams. Wow, we've covered a lot of material. We talked about the 5 different parts of the watershed and the ecological functions of each of those. We also discussed how these parts interact and influence each other. So let's go back and revisit Lane's balance as we see in a natural system. Dynamic equilibrium is maintained because the connectivity between all these components are in place. However, we have very few streams and watersheds which today would be considered unaltered. So our next discussion is going to get into how we've changed the various pieces of this puzzle and how our streams have responded. That concludes our discussion today on the various parts of the watershed in their unaltered state. If you have any questions, please let us know. You can reach the Stream Team program staff by phone, email, or social media. Thank you for your time.